The bullet grazed so close to Lily Harper's cheek that she felt the heat of it before she heard the crack of the rifle. And in that instant, she knew her father's debts had finally caught up with them both. Only he was already 6 feet under, and she was the one left to pay. She dove behind the water trough outside the mercantile, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst right through her ribs, and pressed her face against the rough wood that smelled of algae and horse spit. The streets of Colorado City had gone silent in that particular way they did when violence erupted, everyone scattering like tumbleweeds in a storm, leaving her alone and exposed in the middle of the main road. "Miss Harper." The voice came from her left, deep and urgent. "Stay down." She turned her head just enough to see a man in a dark hat running toward her in a crouch, his duster billowing behind him. Another shot rang out, kicking up dirt near his boots, but he did not slow down. He reached the trough and dropped beside her, his shoulder pressed against hers, and she caught a glimpse of gray eyes under the shadow of his hat brim before he was raising his own pistol and firing 3 quick shots toward the roof of the saloon across the street. "Who are you?" she gasped. "Ethan Lewis, keep your head down." He fired again, and she heard a yelp and then the sound of boots scrambling across shingles. "How many are there?" "I don't know. I was just walking out of the store and then the Garrett brothers," he said, cutting her off. "They have been looking for you since your father passed. Word is he owed them $3,000 from a cattle deal gone bad." Lily felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, the one that had been there since the day they buried her father 3 weeks ago. She had known about his gambling, about the debts, but $3,000 might as well have been $3 million for all the chance she had of paying it. "I do not have that kind of money. I do not have any money." "I know." Ethan glanced at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. It was not pity exactly, but something softer and more complicated. "That is why I am here." Before she could ask what he meant, he was moving again, grabbing her wrist and pulling her up. "The sheriff's office." "Can you run?" She nodded, and then they were sprinting across the street, her skirts tangled around her legs and her lungs burning. Another shot cracked through the air, splintering the doorframe of the sheriff's office just as they crashed through it. Ethan slammed the door behind them and threw the bolt, then turned to face Sheriff Morrison, who was already on his feet with his rifle in his hands. "The Garrett brothers," Ethan said, breathing hard. "On the saloon roof." Morrison cursed and moved to the window, peering out through the gap in the curtains. "How many shots did they get off?" "5, maybe 6. "Anyone hit?" "No." Morrison looked past Ethan to Lily, and she saw the weight of knowledge in his eyes. He knew about the debt, about her situation, and she could see him calculating what it would cost him to get involved. "Miss Harper, you cannot stay in town. Those boys will not stop until they get their money or get you." "I told you I do not have." "They do not care." Morrison's voice was flat. "They figure they can sell you to cover the debt, maybe to one of the mining camps up north, or worse." The words hit her like a physical blow, and she stumbled backward until her shoulders hit the wall. She had heard stories about women disappearing, about the mining camps and the brothels and the kind of life that awaited women with no money and no protection. Her father had promised her it would never come to that he would take care of her, but he had broken that promise the day he put a bullet in his own head rather than face what he owed. "I can help you." Ethan's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. He had moved closer, and when she looked up at him, she saw something steady in his gaze, something that looked almost like certainty. "But you have to trust me. Why would you help me?" The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the bitterness and fear she had been carrying. "You do not even know me." "I knew your father." He said it simply, and she saw a flicker of something painful cross his face. "He saved my life once, about 5 years back. I was tracking a horse thief through the mountains and got caught in a blizzard. Would have frozen to death if your father had not found me and brought me back to your ranch. I owe him, which means I owe you." Lily wanted to laugh at the cruel irony of it. Her father had saved this man's life, and now she needed saving because of the mess her father had left behind. But the laugh died in her throat because there was something in Ethan's eyes that made her think he actually meant what he said, that he would help her even though it would cost him. And God help her, she was desperate enough to take it. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "We leave town tonight. I have a cabin up in the mountains near Leadville. It is remote, hard to find. We can hole up there while I figure out how to deal with the Garrett brothers." "And then what? I just hide forever?" "No," he shook his head. "Then I pay off your father's debt myself." The words hung in the air between them, so impossible that for a moment she thought she had misheard. $3,000. "You cannot." "I can." His voice was firm. "I have been working as a bounty hunter for the past 8 years, Miss Harper. I have saved most of what I earned. I can cover the debt." "Why?" The question burst out of her, desperate and confused. "Why would you do that for someone you do not even know?" He was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face. "Because your father gave me hope when I had none. Because I know what it is like to be alone and scared with nowhere to turn. And because—" he paused, then continued more quietly. "Because I think maybe you have forgotten how to hope for better, and I have enough hope for both of us right now." Lily felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been sealed shut since the day she found her father's body. She had not cried at his funeral, had not let herself feel anything except a dull, grinding anger at being left behind to clean up his mistakes. But now, looking at this stranger who was offering her a lifeline she did not deserve, she felt the hot sting of tears behind her eyes. "I do not know how to repay you," she whispered. "Then do not try." Ethan glanced at the sheriff, who was still watching the street outside. "Morrison, can you keep them busy while we slip out the back?" "I can try." Morrison looked at Lily again, and this time there was something almost like sympathy in his expression. "You take care, Miss Harper. And Lewis, you watch your back. The Garretts have friends all over this territory." "I know." They left through the back door as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Lily of blood and fire. Ethan had horses waiting in the alley behind the jail, already saddled and loaded with supplies. He helped her mount, his hand steady on her waist, and then they were riding out of town, heading west toward the mountains that rose like dark teeth against the dying light. They rode through the night, following trails that Lily could barely see in the darkness. Ethan seemed to know every turn, every stream crossing, guiding his horse with the ease of someone who had traveled this country 100 times before. Lily clung to her saddle, her body aching from the unfamiliar motion, her mind too exhausted to do anything but focus on staying mounted. It was past midnight when Ethan finally called a halt near a small creek surrounded by aspens. He dismounted and came to help her down, and Lily was mortified to find that her legs would not hold her. She collapsed against him, her hands fisting in his duster, and felt him steady her with an arm around her waist. "Easy," he murmured. "You did well. Just need to rest now." He helped her to a fallen log and then set about making camp with quick, efficient movements. Within minutes, he had a small fire going and was heating water for coffee. Lily watched him work, this stranger who had upended her life in the space of an hour, and tried to make sense of what had happened. Part of her kept waiting for him to reveal some ulterior motive, some darker reason for helping her, but he just moved around the camp with a quiet competence that suggested he had done this 1,000 times before. "Here." He handed her a tin cup filled with coffee, and she wrapped her cold hands around it gratefully. Drink. We have another hard day of riding tomorrow. How far is your cabin? 2 more days if the weather holds. He settled onto the ground across the fire from her, his own cup cradled in his hands. It is rough country, but that is why it is safe. The Garretts will not find us there. Lily sipped the coffee, letting the heat spread through her chest. You really have $3,000 saved. I do. That is a fortune. It is a life. He looked at her over the fire, and the flames cast shadows across his face that made him look older, more weathered. Your life, as it happens. I do not understand why you are doing this. Ethan was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was low and rough. My parents died when I was 14. Cholera took them both in the space of a week. I had a younger sister, Mary, and we were left with nothing but debts. I tried to work, tried to keep us fed, but it was not enough. One day I came home and she was gone. Neighbor said a man had come, said he would give her work in Denver. I never saw her again. Lily felt her throat tighten. I am sorry. I spent years looking for her, never found her. He took a long drink of his coffee. By the time I gave up searching, I was already working as a bounty hunter. Good money in it, and I figured if I could not save Mary, maybe I could save someone else's sister, someone else's daughter. He looked up at her. Your father talked about you that night I stayed at your ranch, said you were smart, that you loved horses, that you had your mother's eyes. He was proud of you. He had a strange way of showing it. The bitterness was back in her voice, sharp and cutting. He made mistakes. Ethan's voice was gentle, but he loved you, that much was clear. Lily wanted to argue, to rage at the man who had left her with nothing but debts and fear, but she was too tired. Instead, she just drank her coffee and stared at the fire until her eyes burned and her vision blurred. When Ethan took the cup from her hands and guided her to the bedroll he had laid out, she did not protest. She just curled up on her side and let the exhaustion take her under. She woke to the smell of frying bacon and the sound of Ethan moving around the camp. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the aspens in shades of gold, and for a moment Lily let herself believe that everything that had happened yesterday was just a nightmare. Then she sat up and felt every muscle in her body scream in protest, and reality came crashing back. Morning. Ethan glanced over at her from where he was crouched by the fire. How do you feel? Like I was trampled by a horse. He smiled, and it transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger. It gets easier. Eat something, and then we need to get moving. They rode through a landscape that grew steadily wilder and more beautiful as the day wore on. The prairie gave way to foothills, and then to mountains covered in pine and spruce. Streams tumbled down rocky slopes, and eagles circled overhead. Lily had lived in Colorado all her life, but she had never been this far into the high country, and despite everything, she felt a small spark of wonder at the raw beauty of it. Ethan was a quiet companion, pointing out landmarks and trails, but mostly letting her ride in silence. She was grateful for it. Her mind was too full of questions and fears to make conversation, and she needed the time to think, to try to understand what her life had become in the space of 24 hours. By the time they stopped for the night, Lily was so sore she could barely dismount. Ethan helped her down again, his hands careful on her waist, and she found herself leaning into his strength for just a moment before she caught herself and pulled away. You are doing well, he said, as if he had sensed her embarrassment. Most people would have given up by now. I do not have the luxury of giving up. No. His voice was soft. I suppose you do not. They fell into a routine over the next day. Ride, rest, ride some more. Ethan taught her how to spot game trails and read the weather in the clouds, how to find water and build a fire that would not smoke. Lily absorbed it all with a desperate intensity. as if these skills might somehow give her back the control she had lost. And slowly, without quite meaning to, she began to watch Ethan himself, noticing the way he moved with an economy of motion that spoke of years spent outdoors, the way his eyes were always scanning their surroundings, alert for danger. He was a hard man, she realized, shaped by violence and loss, but there was a gentleness in the way he spoke to the horses and a patience in the way he taught her that suggested the hardness was a shell, not the core of who he was. On the third day, they reached the cabin. It sat in a small valley surrounded by peaks, tucked up against a stand of spruce with a stream running nearby. The cabin itself was small and rough, just one room with a stone fireplace and a loft for sleeping, but it was solidly built and had glass windows, which was more than Lily had expected. "It is not much," Ethan said as he helped her dismount, "but it is warm and dry, and no one knows it is here except me and a few prospectors who winter in these mountains." Lily walked up to the door and pushed it open, stepping into the dim interior. The air smelled of old smoke and pine, and dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight coming through the window. There was a rough table with 2 chairs, a bed built into one wall, and shelves holding canned goods and supplies. It was Spartan, almost primitive, but after 3 days on the trail it looked like heaven. "Thank you," she said, turning to face Ethan, who had followed her inside, "for all of this." He set down the saddlebags he was carrying and looked at her, and there was something in his expression that made her heart skip. "You do not have to thank me, Lily. I meant what I said. I have enough hope for both of us." She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that someone could look at her life, at the wreckage her father had left behind, and still think there was something worth saving. But hope was a dangerous thing, a knife that cut deeper the longer you held it. She had learned that the hard way. "I am afraid," she admitted, the words coming out before she could stop them. "I am afraid to hope for better. Every time I have let myself hope, it has been taken away." Ethan crossed the small space between them in 2 strides. He did not touch her, but he was close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Then hope with me," he said quietly. "Let me carry it for a while until you are strong enough to carry it yourself." Lily felt the tears she had been holding back for weeks finally spill over, hot and bitter on her cheeks. And then, before she could think better of it, she was stepping forward into Ethan's arms, pressing her face against his chest and letting herself cry for the first time since her father died. He held her carefully, one hand on her back and the other cradling her head, and he did not say anything, just let her cry until she had no tears left. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes with shaking hands, she felt wrung out and raw but also somehow lighter, as if the tears had washed away some of the weight she had been carrying. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be." Ethan's voice was rough. "You have earned the right to cry." Over the following days, they settled into the cabin like 2 people learning a new language together. Ethan showed Lily how to fish in the stream and how to set snares for rabbits. She cooked the meals while he chopped wood and tended to the horses. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, and Ethan told her stories about his years as a bounty hunter, about the criminals he had tracked and the places he had been. Lily found herself drawn into his tales, fascinated by this glimpse into a world she had never known existed. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift between them. It started with small things. The way Ethan's hand would linger on hers when he passed her a cup of coffee. The way Lily caught herself watching him when he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the concentration on his face. The way their eyes would meet across the fire and hold for just a beat too long. One evening, about 2 weeks into their stay at the cabin, Ethan came back from checking the snares with 3 fat rabbits and a troubled expression. Lily looked up from the shirt she was mending and felt her stomach tighten. "What is wrong?" He set the rabbits down on the table and turned to face her. "I found tracks about a mile east of here. 2 horses, both shod. Someone is in these mountains. The Garrett brothers, maybe, or it could be prospectors, trappers." He ran a hand through his hair, and Lily noticed it was longer now, curling at his collar. "I cannot be sure, but I do not like it. What do? We stay alert, keep the rifle close." He looked at her, and his expression softened slightly. "And I need to go into Leadville tomorrow, see if I can find out what the situation is in Colorado City, if the Garretts are still looking for you or if they have moved on." Fear spiked through her. "You are leaving, just for a day. I will be back by nightfall tomorrow." He crossed to where she sat and crouched down so they were eye level. "You will be safe here, Lily. The cabin is well hidden, and I will show you how to bar the door from the inside, but I need to know what we are dealing with." She nodded, not trusting her voice. The thought of being alone out here, even for a day, was terrifying, but she could see the logic in what he was saying. They could not hide forever. At some point, they needed to know whether it was safe to come out. Ethan reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers wrapping around hers. "I will come back," he said quietly. "I promise." "You cannot promise that. Anything could happen." "Then let me promise that I will do everything in my power to come back to you." His gray eyes held hers, steady and sure. "Because I am not ready to leave you, Lily Harper, not now, maybe not ever." The words hung between them, loaded with a meaning that made Lily's breath catch. She saw the truth of it in his eyes, the way he looked at her like she was something precious, something worth protecting. And she realized with a jolt that somewhere in the past 2 weeks, in the quiet rhythms of their days together, she had started to feel the same way about him. "Ethan," she whispered. And then she did not know what else to say, how to put into words the tangled mass of emotions in her chest. He seemed to understand anyway. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "When I get back," he said, his voice low and rough, "we need to talk about this, about us." "Yes," she agreed, her heart racing. "We do." He left at dawn the next morning, riding out on his bay gelding with his rifle across his saddle. Lily watched from the cabin door until he disappeared into the trees, and then she went back inside and spent the day in a state of anxious distraction. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, mended all the clothes that needed mending, and cooked a stew that she had no appetite for. Every sound made her jump, every snap of a twig or cry of a bird sending her rushing to the window to peer out at the forest. By nightfall, when Ethan had not returned, her anxiety had grown into full-blown fear. She told herself it was just taking longer than he expected, that he would be back soon. But as the hours stretched on and the darkness deepened, she could not shake the feeling that something had gone wrong. She was sitting by the fire, the rifle across her lap, when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Relief flooded through her, and she was halfway to the door when something made her pause. The footsteps were wrong, too heavy, too uneven. She moved back from the door and raised the rifle, her heart hammering. "Miss Harper," a man's voice, unfamiliar. "Miss Harper, are you in there? My name is Joseph Garrett. I think you know why I am here." Ice flooded Lily's veins. She backed away from the door, the rifle shaking in her hands. "Go away. I do not have your money. I know you do not." The voice was almost conversational. "But that is all right. We can work something out. You come with me peaceful-like, and nobody has to get hurt. I am not going anywhere with you." There was a pause, and then the sound of footsteps moving around the cabin. "That is a shame. Because if you do not come out, I am going to have to come in and get you, and things might get rough if I have to do that." Lily's mind raced. She could shoot through the door, but she did not know how many men were out there or where they were positioned. And if she missed, or if there were more of them than she could handle, she would be defenseless. She needed to think, needed to find a way out of this. The door shuddered as something heavy hit it. The bar held, but barely. Another hit and it would give way. Last chance, Miss Harper. Lily made a decision. She scrambled up the ladder to the loft, dragging the rifle with her. The loft had a small window that looked out onto the back of the cabin, and she prayed it was big enough for her to fit through. She could hear the door splintering below, voices shouting, and then the crash as it gave way. "She is not down here. Check the loft." Lily shoved the window open and stuck her head through. It was a 10-foot drop to the ground, and she could break an ankle if she landed wrong, but that was better than being caught. She pushed the rifle through first and heard it hit the ground below, then wiggled through the window herself, her skirts catching on the rough wood. For a horrible moment she was stuck, hanging half in and half out, and then her skirts tore and she was falling, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind out of her. She heard shouting from inside the cabin and knew she had maybe seconds before they realized where she had gone. She grabbed the rifle and ran for the trees, her lungs burning and her ankle throbbing where she had twisted it. Behind her, she heard more shouting and then the crack of a gunshot. The bullet hit a tree next to her head, spraying her with bark, and she ran harder, deeper into the darkness of the forest. She ran until her legs gave out and she collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping for air. She could still hear them behind her, crashing through the undergrowth, and she knew she could not outrun them for long. She was hurt, exhausted, and they knew these mountains as well as she did. Better, probably. She was trying to decide whether to keep running or find a place to hide when she heard a sound that made her heart leap. Hoofbeats coming fast from the west, and then a voice, loud and clear in the darkness. "Lily, Lily, where are you? Ethan." "Thank God, Ethan." She tried to call out, but her voice came out as barely a croak. She heard him shout something else, and then the sound of more gunshots, these ones coming from a different direction. The men chasing her stopped, and she heard one of them curse. "It is that bounty hunter. Fall back." More shots and then the sound of horses riding hard, moving away. Lily stayed behind the log, too afraid to move until she heard Ethan calling her name again, closer now. "Here," she managed to croak. "I am here." He found her moments later, dropping from his horse and crashing through the brush to where she was huddled behind the log. He pulled her into his arms and she felt him shaking, or maybe that was her, she could not tell. "Are you hurt?" His hands were running over her, checking for injuries. "Did they touch you?" "No, I got away, but Ethan, they found us." "How did they find us?" "I do not know." His voice was grim. "But we cannot stay here. We need to move now." He helped her onto his horse and mounted behind her, one arm tight around her waist. They rode through the night, following trails that Lily could not see, heading deeper into the mountains. Ethan did not speak except to give her occasional instructions to duck or hold on, and Lily was too exhausted and shaken to ask questions. She just leaned back against his chest and let him guide them through the darkness. They finally stopped as dawn was breaking, in a narrow canyon with rock walls on 3 sides. Ethan dismounted and helped her down, and Lily saw that his face was haggard with exhaustion and something that looked like rage. "I am sorry," he said roughly. "This is my fault. I should have been there. I should have protected you. You did protect me. You came back. Not soon enough." He turned away from her, his hands clenched into fists. "I found out in Leadville that the Garretts put out word they would pay $500 to anyone who could tell them where we were. Someone must have spotted us on the trail, followed us back to the cabin. $500 is a lot of money." "It is." He looked at her again and his expression was bleak. "Which means they will not stop. They will keep coming, keep hunting you until they get what they want. Then what do we do? Ethan was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the mountains that were just starting to glow with the rising sun. When he spoke, his voice was hard with decision. We end this. Today. I ride into Leadville, find the Garretts, and pay them the $3,000, and then you are free. No. The word came out sharper than Lily intended. No, you are not doing that. I will not let you throw away everything you have worked for because of my father's mistakes. It is not a mistake if it saves your life. And what about your life? That money was supposed to be your future, your security. I will not let you give that up for me. Why not? He turned to face her fully, and there was something fierce and desperate in his eyes. Why should I not give it up for you? Do you think I care about money more than I care about you? The words hit Lily like a physical blow, and she felt her breath catch. Ethan, I love you. He said it simply, baldly, like it was a fact as undeniable as the mountains around them. I know it has only been a few weeks, and I know this is not how things are supposed to happen, but I do not care. I love you, Lily Harper, and I will burn every dollar I have if it means keeping you safe. Lily felt tears streaming down her face again, but this time they were not tears of grief or fear. They were something else, something that felt dangerously close to joy. You cannot love me. You barely know me. I know enough. He closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. I know that you are brave and strong and you have been through hell, but you have not let it break you. I know that you care for the horses and you sing while you cook, and you have a smile that makes my heart ache. I know that when I am with you, I feel like maybe there is a reason I survived all the things that should have killed me. Because maybe I was supposed to be here now with you. I am afraid, Lily whispered. I am so afraid to hope that this is real, that you are real. Then hope with me. He pressed his forehead against hers, his gray eyes so close she could see the ring of darker color around the iris. I have enough hope for both of us right now. I have enough for the rest of our lives if that is what it takes. And then he was kissing her, and Lily stopped thinking about anything except the feel of his lips on hers, the strength of his arms around her, the way he held her like she was something infinitely precious. She kissed him back with all the fear and longing and desperate hope she had been carrying, and felt something inside her finally start to heal. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ethan rested his forehead against hers again. Marry me, he said. Right now, today. And then we face this together, not as two people alone but as partners. We do not have a preacher. We do not need one. Not yet. We can say the words to each other, make the promises. And when this is over, when you are safe, we will find a preacher and make it legal. But I want you to know, right here, right now, that I am yours and you are mine, and nothing the Garretts or anyone else can do will change that. Lily looked into his eyes and saw the absolute certainty there, the unwavering commitment. And she realized that somewhere in the past 3 weeks, in the quiet moments and the dangerous ones, in the laughter and the tears, she had fallen in love with this man who had offered her hope when she had none. Yes, she said. Yes, I will marry you, Ethan Lewis. They said the words there in the canyon as the sun rose over the mountains, promising to love and honor each other, to stand together through whatever came. They had no rings, no witnesses except the sky and the stones, but Lily felt the weight of the vows settle into her bones like truth. This was real. This was her future standing in front of her with gray eyes and a fierce heart. Now what? She asked when they had finished. Now we fight. Ethan's voice was hard again, but his hand was gentle as he laced his fingers through hers. But we do it smart. The Garretts want money. We give them money, but on our terms, in a place where we have the advantage. You have a plan. I am working on one. He helped her back onto the horse, and this time when he mounted behind her, it felt different. They were not just two people running anymore. They were partners, bound by promises and hope and love. They spent the day planning and preparing. Ethan knew a place, an old prospector's camp about 5 miles from Leadville, where the terrain would make it hard for the Garretts to try anything. He would send word that he wanted to meet, that he would pay the full $3,000 if they guaranteed to leave Lily alone. And if they tried to double-cross him, well, Ethan had not survived 8 years as a bounty hunter by being unprepared. They rode into the prospector's camp just after noon the next day. It was exactly as Ethan had described it, a flat area surrounded by boulders and scrub pine, with only one clear approach. Ethan positioned Lily behind the largest boulder with the rifle and clear instructions to shoot anyone who was not him if things went wrong. Then he stood in the center of the clearing and waited. The Garrett brothers arrived an hour later, 2 hard-looking men on dusty horses. Lily watched them through a gap in the rocks, her finger on the rifle trigger, and felt her heart hammering in her throat. She recognized Joseph Garrett from his voice at the cabin, a tall man with a scar running down one cheek. The other must be his brother, shorter but broader, with mean eyes and a smile that made Lily's skin crawl. Lewis. Joseph Garrett reined in his horse about 20 feet from Ethan. "Got your message. You really got the money?" "I do." Ethan's voice was calm, almost casual. $3,000, everything Harper owed you. But first I need your word that you will leave Miss Harper alone. No more threats, no more hunting. You take the money and ride out. That is a lot of money to pay for a woman you barely know. The brother, whose name Lily did not know, leaned forward in his saddle. "Makes a man wonder what she is to you. That is none of your concern. Maybe it is." Joseph's eyes were scanning the area, looking for Lily, and Ethan must have seen it because his hand moved fractionally closer to his pistol. "The money," Ethan said flatly. "Do we have a deal or not?" Joseph looked at his brother, some silent communication passing between them, and then back at Ethan. "We have a deal. Show us the money." Ethan slowly reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. He opened it and let them see the glint of gold coins inside. "It is all here." "Every dollar. Bring it here." "No." Ethan's voice was hard. "You come get it, but you come slow and you keep your hands where I can see them." For a moment, Lily thought it was going to work. Joseph dismounted and started walking toward Ethan, his hands held out to the sides. But then the brother moved, his hand darting toward his gun, and Lily knew with cold certainty that they had never intended to honor the deal. She fired without thinking, the rifle kicking hard against her shoulder. The bullet hit the brother in the arm, spinning him sideways in his saddle. And then Ethan was moving, drawing his pistol faster than Lily would have thought possible. He fired once, twice, and Joseph Garrett went down hard. The brother was trying to control his panicked horse with one hand while reaching for his gun with the other. Lily fired again, this time aiming for the horse's hooves, and the animal reared and bolted, throwing the brother to the ground. He scrambled to his feet and started to run, but Ethan was already on him, tackling him to the dirt. There was a brief, brutal struggle, and then Ethan was standing over the man with his pistol pressed to the back of his head. "Do not move," he growled. "Do not even breathe wrong." Lily climbed out from behind the boulder, the rifle still in her hands, and walked over to where Joseph Garrett lay on the ground. He was still breathing, but barely, blood spreading across his chest. He looked up at her with glazed eyes. "Should have just taken the money," he wheezed. "You should have." Lily felt nothing looking at him, no pity, no regret, just a cold satisfaction that he could not hurt her anymore. He died a minute later, his eyes still open and staring at the sky. Ethan hauled his brother to his feet and shoved him toward his horse. "You are going to ride back to Colorado City," he said, his voice deadly calm. "And you are going to tell everyone you meet that the debt is settled, that Lily Harper is under my protection. And if I ever hear that you or anyone else has so much as looked at her wrong, I will hunt you down and finish what we started here. Do you understand?" The man nodded frantically, cradling his bloody arm. "I understand. The debt is settled. I will tell everyone." "Good." Ethan stepped back and let him mount his horse. "Now get out of my sight." They watched him ride away, and then Lily turned to Ethan and saw that he was shaking, the adrenaline finally catching up with him. She took the pistol from his hand and set it on the ground, then pulled him into her arms. "It is over," she whispered against his chest. "It is really over. I thought I was going to lose you." His voice was muffled against her hair. "When he went for his gun, I thought, but you did not. We are both here. We are both alive." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other while the sun beat down and the wind whispered through the pine trees. And then Ethan pulled back and looked down at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her heart skip. "I meant what I said yesterday. About marrying you, about spending the rest of my life with you. That has not changed. Good." Lily reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "Because I meant it too." They buried Joseph Garrett there in the prospectors' camp, not out of respect, but because it was easier than hauling the body into town. Then they rode to Leadville and found the sheriff, told him what had happened. The sheriff, a grizzled man who had seen too much violence to be shocked by one more death, took their statements and declared it self-defense. The $3,000, still in its leather pouch, stayed with Ethan. "You should use it to start over," Lily said that night as they sat in a hotel room in Leadville, the first real bed either of them had slept in for weeks. "Buy land, maybe some cattle, build the life you always wanted. I want you to have it." Ethan was sitting on the edge of the bed and he reached out and took her hand. "It is as much yours as it is mine, more since it was meant to pay your father's debt. But the debt is paid. One way or another it is settled. Then we use it together." He pulled her closer until she was standing between his knees and looked up at her with those steady gray eyes. "We find a place, buy some land like you said, build a ranch, build a life. Together." Lily felt the now familiar sting of tears, but they were good tears this time, tears of relief and hope and a joy so fierce it almost scared her. "Where?" "Anywhere you want." Ethan wrapped his arms around her waist. "We could go back to Colorado City if you want to be near familiar places. Or we could go somewhere new, make a fresh start. A fresh start sounds good." Lily thought about the town where her father had died, where everyone knew about his debts and his failure, and she knew she could not go back there. Not yet, maybe not ever. What about here? Leadville is growing and the land around it is good for ranching. Leadville it is, then. Ethan smiled, and Lily felt her heart turn over in her chest. She leaned down and kissed him, slow and sweet, and felt him pull her down onto the bed beside him. They found a preacher the next day, a Methodist minister who asked no questions and married them in his small church with his wife and the church caretaker as witnesses. Lily wore the best dress she had, which was not much, and Ethan bought her a simple gold ring from the jeweler next door. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Ethan kissed her like he was sealing a promise, and Lily felt the last of the fear and bitterness that had been living in her chest finally dissolve. They spent a week in Leadville, looking at land and making plans. Ethan found a property about 10 miles outside of town, 160 acres of good grazing land with a creek running through it and a stand of aspen on the northern edge. There was no house, just the remains of an old prospector's shack, but that did not matter. They would build their own house, make it exactly what they wanted. "We will need horses," Lily said as they stood on the land that was now theirs, looking out at the mountains that rose like sentinels to the west. And cattle. And chickens, probably, if we want eggs. And a barn, Ethan added. And a corral and a garden for vegetables. It is a lot of work. It is. He slipped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. But we have time, and we have each other. They started building the next week. Ethan hired some men from town to help with the heavy work. And together they raised the frame of a house, sturdy and square, with a wide porch and windows that faced the mountains. Lily worked alongside them, sawing boards and hammering nails until her hands were covered in blisters. At night they slept in a tent near the construction site, wrapped in blankets and each other, and planned the future they were building together. By late summer, the house was finished. It was not fancy, just 4 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and warm, and it was theirs. They moved in their meager possessions, and Lily hung curtains. She had sewn herself in the windows and put wildflowers in jars on the table. Ethan bought 6 horses, good strong animals that he planned to train and sell, and a dozen head of cattle to start their herd. Life settled into a new rhythm, one built on hard work and quiet contentment. Lily discovered that she loved the ranch, loved the smell of the hay and the sound of the horses, and the way the light looked coming over the mountains at dawn. Ethan was a patient teacher, showing her how to handle the horses and read the weather and all the 100 small skills that made up a rancher's life. And in the evenings, when the work was done, they would sit on the porch and watch the sun set, and Lily would lean against Ethan's shoulder and think about how far she had come from that day in Colorado City, when bullets had rained down, and she had thought her life was over. One evening in early autumn, as they sat on the porch watching the aspen turn gold, Ethan put his hand over hers and said, "Are you happy?" Lily turned to look at him, this man who had given her hope when she had none, who had loved her when she was too broken to love herself. "Yes," she said simply, "I am happy." "Good." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles just like he had that first night in the cabin. "Because you deserve to be happy, Lily Lewis. You deserve every good thing. So do you." She leaned her head on his shoulder and felt his arm come around her, warm and solid. "We both do." Winter came, bringing snow that piled high against the fences and turned the mountains into white giants. Ethan and Lily spent long evenings by the fire, reading or talking or just sitting together in comfortable silence. The work was harder in the cold, the animals more demanding, but they managed. And in the spring, when the snow melted and the creek ran high with runoff, Lily realized she was pregnant. She told Ethan on a soft May morning as they were working in the garden, planting the seeds that would become their summer vegetables. He went very still when she said the words, his hands frozen in the dirt, and then he looked up at her with an expression of such wonder that Lily felt tears spring to her eyes. "A baby." His voice was hushed, almost reverent. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." She knelt down beside him and took his dirty hands in hers. "We are going to have a baby, Ethan." He pulled her into his arms, heedless of the dirt and the seeds, and held her so tight she could barely breathe. "I love you," he said fiercely against her hair. "I love you so much, Lily. You and this baby, you are everything." The pregnancy was not easy. Lily was sick for the first few months, and the summer heat made everything worse. But Ethan was endlessly patient, bringing her water and cool cloths and rubbing her feet when they swelled. And slowly, as her belly grew and the baby began to move, Lily felt a new kind of hope taking root. This was their future, growing inside her. This was the life they had built together against all odds. The baby came on a cold November night, delivered by the doctor from Leadville and Ethan, who refused to leave Lily's side even when the doctor told him he should wait outside. It was a long, hard labor, and there were moments when Lily thought she could not do it, when the pain was too much and she wanted to give up. But Ethan was there, holding her hand and whispering encouragement, and when the baby finally came, a squalling, red-faced boy with a shock of dark hair, Lily felt a love so overwhelming she thought her heart might burst from it. "A son," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. He was cradling the baby against his chest, and there were tears streaming down his face. "We have a son, Lily." "What should we name him?" Lily was exhausted, every muscle in her body aching, but she had never felt more alive. Ethan looked down at the baby, then back at her. "What about Matthew?" "It means gift of God. Matthew Lewis." Lily tested the name on her tongue and found it fit perfectly. "I love it." They settled into parenthood with the same determination they had brought to building the ranch. Matthew was a fussy baby, colicky and difficult, but he was theirs, and they loved him with a fierceness that surprised them both. Ethan would walk the floor with him for hours, singing old trail songs in his rough voice, while Lily watched from the bed and felt her heart expand with love for both of them. The years passed, each one adding new layers to the life they were building. The ranch prospered. Ethan's horses gained a reputation for quality, and they were able to buy more cattle, expand their herd. Matthew grew into a sturdy, curious toddler with his father's gray eyes and his mother's determination. And 2 years after Matthew was born, Lily gave birth to a daughter, a tiny perfect girl they named Sarah. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken fences and all the 100 small crises that made up ranch life. But Ethan and Lily faced them together, partners in every sense of the word. And on the hard days, when the work seemed endless and the problems insurmountable, Lily would remember that day in Colorado City when she had thought her life was over. And she would look at Ethan and their children and the home they had built, and she would feel nothing but gratitude for the hope he had given her. One evening, about 5 years after they had married, Lily and Ethan sat on the porch watching Matthew and Sarah play in the yard. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of pink and gold, and the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. Ethan had his arm around Lily's shoulders, and she was leaning into him, comfortable and content. "You remember that first night at the cabin?" Ethan asked suddenly. "When you said you were afraid to hope for better?" "I remember." Lily turned to look at him. "Why?" "Because I have been thinking about how far we have come, how much has changed." He gestured to the yard where their children were playing, to the house and the barn and the land stretching out around them. "This is what hope looks like, Lily. This life we have built, it is proof that hoping for better is not a foolish thing. It is the bravest thing a person can do." Lily felt tears sting her eyes, but they were good tears. "You gave me that," she said softly. "When I had lost everything, when I thought there was nothing left to hope for, you gave me hope. You said you had enough for both of us. And I did." Ethan pulled her closer. "But you took that hope and made it into something real. You took it and built a life with it. That was all you, Lily." "It was both of us." She reached up and touched his face, feeling the scratch of his beard under her fingers. "We did this together." They sat there as the sun sank lower, and the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Matthew came running up to the porch, his face flushed and happy, with Sarah toddling behind him. Ethan scooped them both up, one in each arm, and they shrieked with laughter. "Tell us a story, Papa," Matthew demanded. "Tell us about the time you saved Mama from the bad men." Ethan glanced at Lily, a question in his eyes, and she nodded. They had agreed that when the children were old enough, they would tell them the truth about how they had met, about the danger and the fear and the hope that had brought them together. But they would tell it as a story with a happy ending, because that was what it was. "All right," Ethan said, settling back onto the bench with a child on each knee. "But it is getting late, so I will make it quick. Once upon a time, there was a woman who had lost everything. Her father had died and left her with debts she could not pay, and bad men were hunting her. She was afraid, and she had forgotten how to hope for anything better." "Was that Mama?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "That was your Mama," Ethan confirmed. "And one day, when those bad men came for her, a cowboy rode into town. He had been a bounty hunter, traveling all over the territory, but he remembered that your Mama's father had once saved his life, so he decided to save hers. Were you the cowboy, Papa?" Matthew was leaning forward, even though he had heard this story before. "I was, and I told your Mama that even though she was afraid to hope for better, I had enough hope for both of us. I told her to hope with me and I would keep her safe." "And you did," Sarah said happily. "You saved Mama, and then you fell in love and built this ranch and had us." "That is right, little one." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "And do you know what the moral of the story is?" Both children shook their heads. "The moral is that hope is never wasted, even when things seem darkest." "Your Mama taught me that. She was so brave, even when she was scared. And she took the hope I gave her and made it into something beautiful. She made it into this family, this home, this life." Lily watched them, her husband and her children, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. This was what she had been afraid to hope for all those years ago. A home, a family, a man who loved her not in spite of her brokenness but because of it, because it had made her who she was. A life that was full of hard work and simple joys, and the kind of deep contentment that she had thought was only for other people. The children went to bed shortly after, worn out from their play. Lily tucked them in while Ethan checked on the animals one last time. When she came back downstairs, he was waiting for her and he held out his hand. "Dance with me," he said. "There is no music. Then we will make our own." They swayed together in the kitchen, moving to a rhythm only they could hear. Ethan hummed an old tune, something he had learned on the trail years ago, and Lily rested her head on his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she said quietly. "I do not think I say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. I know." Ethan's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, every day more than the day before. That is how it works with us." They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, and Lily thought about all the moments that had led them to this one. The fear and the danger and the desperate flight into the mountains. The quiet days at the cabin, learning to trust each other. The wedding in the small church, the building of the ranch, the births of their children. Every moment, good and bad, had been necessary. Every moment had brought them here, to this kitchen, to this dance, to this life. As the years continued to pass, the ranch grew and changed with them. Matthew grew into a tall, serious boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Sarah was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and getting into trouble. 3 years after Sarah, Lily gave birth to another son, James, who was quieter than his siblings but had a gift for working with the cattle. And 2 years after that came another daughter, Emma, who looked so much like Lily that Ethan would sometimes just stare at her in wonder. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, with new rooms added and the loft converted into proper bedrooms. The barn was enlarged, and they built a bunkhouse for the ranch hands they now employed. The herd grew from dozens to hundreds, and Ethan's horses were in demand throughout Colorado and beyond. But success brought its own challenges. There were droughts that killed the grass and forced them to sell cattle they could not feed. There were harsh winters that froze the stock tanks and made every day a battle for survival. There were injuries and illnesses, narrow escapes and heart-stopping moments. But through it all, Ethan and Lily held firm to each other, partners in the truest sense. One spring, when Matthew was 15 and talking about joining a cattle drive north, Lily found herself back on the porch at sunset, watching her oldest son work with a young horse in the corral. Ethan came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "He is good with them," Ethan said, pride evident in his voice. "Better than I was at his age. He learned from the best." Lily leaned back against him. "But I am not ready for him to leave yet." "I know, neither am I," Ethan sighed. "But we cannot keep them here forever. They need to find their own way, make their own lives. I know. I just wish they could stay small a little longer. They grow up too fast." Ethan turned her in his arms so she was facing him. "But we did well with them, Lily. All 4 of them, they are good kids, strong and kind and brave. Just like their mother. And stubborn and hard-headed like their father," Lily added with a smile. "That too." He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips. "I am proud of what we have built here, not just the ranch but the family, the life. I could not have done any of it without you." "We did it together," Lily said, echoing the words that had become their mantra over the years. "That is how we do everything." The children grew and eventually began to leave one by one. Matthew did join that cattle drive, and then another, and eventually he started his own ranch in Wyoming with a woman he met in Cheyenne. Sarah married a doctor from Denver and moved to the city, though she came back to visit as often as she could. James stayed on the ranch, taking over more and more of the daily operations as Ethan grew older. And Emma, their youngest, surprised them all by becoming a teacher, opening a small school in Leadville for the children of miners and ranchers. Ethan and Lily grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love for each other never dimmed. They still danced in the kitchen on quiet evenings. They still sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains. They still held hands like young lovers, fingers intertwined, a connection that had only grown stronger with time. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Lily with a trip back to the cabin where they had first stayed, the one that had been their refuge during those desperate early days. It had fallen into disrepair, the roof sagging and the windows broken, but it was still standing. "Why did you bring me here?" Lily asked as they stood in front of the cabin, memories washing over her. "Because this is where it started," Ethan said. "This is where I first told you that I had enough hope for both of us. And I wanted to come back here to this place and tell you that you were right. We did it together. We took that hope and we built something beautiful with it." Lily turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "I was so afraid back then, so broken and lost. I know. But you were also brave. You took a chance on a stranger, on a future you could not see, and look what came of it." He gestured around them, at the mountains and the sky and the wild beauty of the place. "Look at the life we made." They spent the night at the cabin, lying on blankets under the stars just like they had 20 years before. And as Lily lay in Ethan's arms, listening to his steady breathing and feeling the warmth of his body against hers, she thought about the girl she had been and the woman she had become. She thought about fear and hope and love, about the way they were all tangled together, inseparable. "Thank you," she whispered into the darkness. "For what?" Ethan's voice was sleepy. "For giving me hope when I had none. For loving me when I did not think I was worth loving. For building this life with me." He pulled her closer, his lips brushing her hair. "You gave me just as much, Lily. More, maybe. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to stop running and start living. You gave me everything." They returned to the ranch the next day, to the life they had built and the family that was waiting for them. And as the years continued to pass, they watched their grandchildren grow up on the same land where their children had played. They celebrated weddings and births, weathered losses and griefs. And through it all they held fast to each other and to the hope that had brought them together all those years ago in Colorado City. Ethan lived to be 72 years old, and he died peacefully in his sleep on a cool October morning with Lily holding his hand. His last words were, "I love you," and Lily held those words close to her heart as she mourned the loss of her partner, her love, her reason for hoping. But even in her grief, she was not afraid, because Ethan had taught her that hope was not about avoiding pain or loss. It was about believing that life was worth living even when it was hard, even when it hurt. It was about building something beautiful and lasting, something that would outlive them both. Lily lived another 8 years after Ethan died, spending her days on the ranch they had built together, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the cowboy who had ridden into town and saved her life, who had given her hope when she had none. She told them about the life they had built, about the love that had sustained them through decades of hardship and joy. And on a warm June morning, with the sun streaming through her bedroom window and the sound of her great-grandchildren playing in the yard below, Lily closed her eyes and let herself go. She went peacefully, with a smile on her face, because she knew what was waiting for her. She knew that Ethan would be there, holding out his hand, ready to dance with her again. The ranch continued after Lily died, passed down through the generations just as she and Ethan had always hoped. Their children and grandchildren kept it going, maintaining the land and the buildings and the legacy of hope that their grandparents had built. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun was setting over the mountains, those who knew the story would stand on the porch and think about the woman who had been afraid to hope and the cowboy who had told her to hope with him, who had promised he had enough for both of them. And they would remember that hope, real hope, was not about being naive or foolish. It was about being brave enough to believe in better things, even when the world gave you every reason not to. It was about taking the hand of someone who believed in you and building something beautiful together. It was about love and partnership, and the enduring power of two people who refused to give up on each other or on the life they were creating. That was the legacy Lily and Ethan left behind. Not just a ranch or a family, but a story about hope and love that would be told for generations. A story that proved that even in the hardest of times, even when everything seemed lost, there was always a reason to hope. There was always someone willing to say, "Hope with me," and mean it with every fiber of their being. And in the end, that was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.